let's get into my grand final tips. So let's do this one more time for the year. Brisbane, Hawthorn, Geelong, Port, Brisbane, Sydney, Brisbane. Okay. Won't have to do that again next week, thankfully. Um, all right. So it was the grand final I was expecting to start. I got both games right last week. That is good. Sydney and the Lions. Oh my, where do we start? Let's start with what the teams have to get right. Sydney first. They have to start this game well. We talk about their slow starts every week, and they did it perfectly last week. They started the game really well, and from there it just fell into place. It was dominant. They had the momentum to carry into those final three quarters, and they just kept Port at bay. Port are not Brisbane, to be fair. So Brisbane wouldn't necessarily let that happen. However, and Brisbane are also a team who are capable of a comeback in the way Sydney are, and capable of a late charge. However, in saying that, obviously, if Sydney were to not start this game the way they wanted to, and the way they have been starting games in the past, particularly in that back end of the year, Brisbane are going to make them pay. Brisbane are going to make them pay. Because what Brisbane have to get right is carrying the momentum into this contest. So we talked about, well, for the last 3 weeks, we've talked about Brisbane's momentum. And obviously, the Carlton game was the start of it, a very different game, but the way they dominated us, they just carried that belief into the rest of the final series, really. They go into the Giants game, they're down, they're able to come back, beat them. That adds extra belief, extra momentum into the team. That's what carried them through to Geelong, and that's why I picked them against Geelong. Words, but we made it. And now they've done the same thing to the Cats. That end of the game where it was 2 goals to the Lions, 2 goals to the Cats, 2 goals to the Lions, and they were able to grind that out and show their quality and be able to come out the better team is going to be so huge in a game like this where it may be very similar because Sydney and Brisbane are two teams that are very capable um of having those big patches in games and having the momentum swinging either way. I think that this game is going to be like that. I think there's going to be momentum swings. There are going to be patches where Brisbane kick four in a row. There might be patches where Sydney kick four in a row. It's going to be a very difficult game to predict, in my opinion. Which leads to my prediction. I've been such a huge, I've been so huge on momentum throughout this final series. So big on momentum. And with that momentum, that would obviously lean me towards potentially Brisbane, the way I've spoken about their momentum in particular, and the way they've sort of pushed through this final series and the games they've won and the manner in which they've won those games. But the same can also be said for Sydney. Obviously, the way they won that Giants game and the belief that I spoke about and the belief that they take out of that game and that late game, believing that they can win at any given time. And then the way they've beaten Port Adelaide last week in just such dominant fashion would give them an added layer of belief that they can control games rather than have to fight them out and find those momentum patches to be able um to win games because they didn't have patches of momentum against Port. The whole game was just them in control, which hasn't really been the case for Sydney for quite some time. So maybe that's an extra added layer of belief that they're not always the team that has to be chasing a victory rather than holding off the opposition. I look at this game very similar to the way I look at this Port Geelong game. And the way I looked at the Port Geelong game, if anyone remembers at that time, was that I really liked what Geelong were bringing into the game. And I really liked how Geelong looked. And something was edging me towards Geelong. And the same thing's happening here, where something is edging me towards Brisbane. Like it just feels like that they should be winning. Not should be winning because obviously Sydney have been what they've been this year. Fancy the grand final being the hardest game to predict all year. It's probably how it should be. We're very lucky. Much like Port and Geelong, I think it would be wrong where I tip Port in that game. It would be wrong for me to not tip Sydney here because they should be winning, in my opinion. They've been the best team all year. Obviously, they had that slump. We talk about that slump every week, but the slump is done. They're the benchmark, in my opinion. They have all their pieces in place. They're fit, they're firing, they're ready to go. Logan McDonald should play. No Oscar McInerney for Brisbane as well. I should have mentioned. Is huge. I think Darcy Fort will do fine. I think he'll do a fine job. But he probably will get beaten in there by Brodie Grundy. I just think it's Sydney's year. I just think it's Sydney's year. Something is talking to me with this Brisbane side of things. So if they win, don't be surprised. But man, it would just be wrong to not tip Sydney, I think. For me. If you want to tip Brisbane, go ahead. Um, and I won't blame you for it. But we're gonna have fun watching this grand final. We're gonna have fun. It's gonna be a good grand final. And I think the Swans are gonna win. Um, outside of that, what have we got to predict? Norm Smith medal. Um, it's another hard one. Six of the seven, six of the last seven norms have gone to midfielders. Bobby is obviously the outlier. I'd be backing in a midfielder in this game in particular with such dominant midfields on either side. Almost every game Sydney have played this year outside of maybe a Blakey or Papley masterclass um, or a 9 goal Joel Amati display. The best player on the ground has been Heaney, Errol, or Warren. So it's going to be one of those three. I think it'd be odd to say anyone out of those three if you've tipped Sydney. I don't know if Jared Berry goes to one of them, and vice versa. Obviously, James Jordan might go to one of the Lions mids. But if one of them gets tagged, oh, I don't know. I really don't know. I think I'm going to be safe. And I'm going to go with the player who has been their best player all year, in my opinion, and that is Isaac Heaney for the Norm Smith medal. I think it would be a fitting reward for his year. And I think if anyone's going to be able to strap the team on his back and win them the game, and obviously has that ability going forward where he can contribute on the scoreboard, um, he has the midfield craft down pat. So if he ends the game with 25 to 30 touches and 2 goals or a goal or whatever, in a win that he's essentially dragged them to, as he has done many weeks, I think it should be enough for Norm. And as I said, it would be a fitting reward for the year he's had, the individual year that he's had. If Brizzy were to pick up the win, I think Lachie Neale might have a James Jordan behind him. I'd be watching out for Will Ashcroft, I think, because I think that kid is fantastic. He was unbelievable against the Giants. He's had a very good back end of the year since he's come back from that ACL. And I don't think he'll get nearly as much attention in terms of a matchup as Lachie Neale, as a Josh Dunkley, as Hugh McCluggage would. So I like Will Ashcroft if Brucey were to pick up the win. But Isaac Heaney is my pick for the Norm Smith. And I'll give a prediction for first goal as well, because why not? As I said in the prediction, I think Sydney has to start the game well. I think that's important. And I think they'll do that. Um, so I think the first goal is going to go to a Sydney player to get that momentum going. And I'm going to go with, let's go with Joel. Let's go with Joel Amati because he has to have a big game as well, I think. I think he will have a big game. So we're going to go with Joel to kick the first goal. Just a nice stab pass from Errol Goulden maybe into his lap, and he kicks the first goal. So Joel Amati for me.